What's up guys, Lon here from Android Authority, and this is LG's latest flagship, and in a nutshell, it's LG's safest bet yet. But is it one that's worth putting your money on? This is the LG G6. So this year, LG has gone back to basics. There's no more tricks, no more experiments, and most importantly, no more modularity. Instead, the G6 focuses on just being a simple, solid, and reliable smartphone. It's got a pretty straightforward design formula with a sturdy metal frame and features a couple different kinds of Gorilla Glass. You've got Gorilla Glass 3 on the front, Gorilla Glass 3 over the camera lens, and Gorilla Glass 5 for the back. And yes, because it's covered in a lot of glass, it is very prone to fingerprints and smudges, but they're a lot less noticeable if you have the platinum colored version. This new sealed-in design does mean you no longer get access to the battery, but that's a really small price to pay for what you get in return, which is IP68 dust and water resistance. The G6 is surprisingly very easy and comfortable to use in one hand, and that's due to a number of reasons. It's got these super tight bezels on the sides and top and bottom, and a new aspect ratio for the screen that makes the screen taller and less wide, and allows LG to fit a bigger screen but still keep the overall footprint down. And the phone is significantly smaller than Google's Pixel XL or Apple's iPhone 7 Plus, both of which have smaller screens. It's a feat of engineering that's much easier to appreciate when you actually hold and use the phone. Although it's a new design, you still have LG's signature power button on the back that doubles as a fingerprint sensor, and it works extremely well. It's very fast and accurate to unlock, and just like the last couple of LG flagships, you don't have to physically press the button down in order for it to start unlocking. It does have a headphone jack, which is up top, and the other standard buttons and ports like the volume buttons are on the left side. The SIM card slot is on the right, and along the bottom is the USB Type-C port and the single speaker. The speaker itself is surprisingly loud for just one speaker, but it does suffer from the same issues as every other bottom firing speaker, which is it can easily be blocked by your hand when you have the phone in landscape. The real star of the show here though is the 5.7-inch display. It's an LCD instead of OLED, but it's actually a very good looking LCD panel. It has the perfect amount of color and contrast so that it doesn't appear washed out or overly saturated, and it's bright enough to easily see in direct sunlight. It's Quad HD, but it has a new aspect ratio of 18:9, also known as 2:1, so you're getting some extra pixels on the long side of the display, and if you split the screen in half, you essentially get two perfectly symmetrical squares stacked on top of one another or side by side. Because of the taller or wider screen if you're in landscape, this makes things like split screen multitasking a little bit easier because you're able to see more of each individual app. Also new to the screen is the corners are rounded, and the display itself is actually rounded. It's not just an overlay sitting on top of the square screen, and LG says this helps make the screen more durable against corner impacts over a traditional screen with regular 90-degree corners. The rounded corners also add a nice aesthetic touch, but they're not perfectly rounded, and you can still see some sharpness to these corners. It's not a huge deal and doesn't really take away from how good the screen looks, but it is one of those things that's hard to unsee after you notice it for the first time. The screen also has HDR support for both Dolby Vision and HDR10, which will give you a much brighter and more vibrant image, and it's not something you can fully take advantage of right now, but you will be able to eventually once streaming services like Netflix and Amazon Prime Video roll out their HDR support for smartphones. Now, if 18:9 does become the new standard for smartphone screens, there will be some growing pains. When you're consuming content that's natively in 18:9, it's absolutely incredible, but when you're watching 16:9 content or using an app that doesn't scale to the new aspect ratio, you will deal with some awkward black bars. LG's built in an app scaling feature that lets you force apps to rescale to 18:9, but you'll want to use this with caution because it can cause the contents of the app to be cut off, and it is something that LG does warn you about. If you aren't sick of hearing about 18:9 already, LG's even updated their software to show off this new aspect ratio. You'll notice that many of LG's default apps, wallpapers, and even the lock screen have this split two-square design, or at the very least are following the proportions and guidelines created by this aspect ratio, and it's a very clean and refreshing new look that at the same time falls really well in line with Google's material design. At the core of the OS, you have Android Nougat running the show with LG's GUI, and just like they do every year, they've updated it for the G6. It still has all the same features, so it's essentially just a new coat of paint with more natural colors that's much easier on your eyes, which you can see through throughout many of LG's apps and wallpapers. The app icons have been updated to these square icons with rounded corners for a much more uniform look, and pop-up menus within applications also have rounded corners. It's meant to complement the rounded corners of the display, and personally I like the look of the new icons because it makes them all the same size, but LG does give you the option to revert back to the original icons if you'd rather use those. There is Google Assistant on board, which makes the G6 the first non-Pixel phone to have Google Assistant, and this would have been a pretty huge selling point for the G6 if Google didn't release Google Assistant for other devices running Nougat or Marshmallow. It's still a really awesome feature regardless, and the more devices running Google Assistant, the better. Inside, it's being powered by a Snapdragon 821 chip, which is not the latest that Qualcomm has to offer this year, and some people may be disappointed by that, but it's still a really powerful processor. There's also 4 gigs of RAM on board, and I've really had no issues with the performance on the G6 at all. I guess you could say it flies like a G6. Terrible, I know. But in all seriousness, it's a very fast phone. Launching apps, multitasking, and playing graphically intensive games, it handles it all extremely well without any noticeable stutters or drop frames. This is also an unlocked version of the G6, so the phone isn't being bogged down by unnecessary bloatware, so performance could be slightly affected on carrier versions, but generally speaking, if you had any concerns about the phone's performance, there's nothing to worry about here. Now for most regions, the phone only comes in a 32GB version, and in 2017, that isn't a whole lot of storage, but as you usually would expect from an LG phone, there is a micro SD card slot that supports up to 2 terabytes if you need the extra space. Battery life on the G6 has also been extremely solid. It's got a 3,300 mAh battery, which isn't the largest battery we've ever seen in a smartphone, but it's still a fairly decent size and has been more than good enough to comfortably get me through a full day on a consistent basis. Even on a heavy usage day where I might use the camera a lot and do a few hours of gaming, I still get through a full day just fine with anywhere between 20 to 25% battery life left at the end of the night. I've yet to charge this phone during the middle of the day, but if you do need to top it off, it's got your standard Quick Charge 3.0, and the US version exclusively has wireless charging, so that's another option that you have available if you want to take advantage of that. LG's camera got a little bit of an upgrade this year, but it's in a way that you probably wouldn't have expected for the G6. LG has gone from 16 down to 13 megapixels in favor of getting rid of the camera bump, but this time both the standard angle and wide angle lens share the same 13 megapixels, so there's no loss in resolution when switching between cameras, and switching between cameras is now a much smoother transition than it was before. They are, however, 2 very different lenses. The standard angle is f1.8 with optical image stabilization, while the wide angle is f2.4 and lacks both OIS and autofocus. LG has also swapped out their laser autofocus system in favor of phase detection, which works just as good if not better. The camera app is mostly the same as previous LG phones, but because of this 18:9 screen, you now have this carousel of previews on the side that lets you see literally every single photo you've taken versus just the one that most smartphone cameras will typically show you. This is easily one of the best and most clever uses of the wider screen. There's a new square camera that's perfect for apps like Instagram, and it has a few different modes built inside of it. You can snap a photo and immediately see a preview of it on the bottom half of the screen, or take multiple photos or short clips that the camera will auto-stitch together. They're all really different and useful in their own ways, but my personal favorite has to be the guide shot, which allows you to use a pre-made template or a previous photo that you've taken as a guide for taking another photo with the same framing or composition. New to the G6's camera, but not new to LG, is full-on manual video recording, which previously was exclusive to just the V series, but it looks like LG has finally caved in and given users what they've wanted, so you no longer have to wait for the V series if you want manual video, and it has all the same features like focus peaking, hi-fi audio recording, and a wind noise filter. The camera is a lot of fun to use, especially because of that wide angle, which can take some really breathtaking landscape shots, and it's amazing how much more you can fit into the frame over the standard telephoto lens. The quality of the photos themselves are also very impressive. It has excellent detail, vibrant colors, great contrast, and overall pretty good dynamic range. It doesn't have any major issues with overexposing highlights or crushing shadows, which is something that has always been a little problematic with previous LG cameras, so it's nice to see LG's made some improvements with that on the G6. Now, as fun as the wide-angle lens is, it's not that great in low light, and you're better off using the main sensor. This isn't all too surprising considering you have a wider aperture and optical image stabilization to help, but with the standard angle lens, you'll get a much sharper, more colorful, and much cleaner image over the noisier, muted, and more overexposed shots of the wide angle. The 5-megapixel front camera is also a wide-angle lens with a 100-degree field of view, which is great for group shots, but just don't expect it to be of the highest quality, especially in low light where it completely falls apart. LG wanted to get back to the things that matter and create a good, solid, all-around smartphone, and they've nailed that with the G6. It performs well, has an excellent camera, good battery life, and offers features that people actually want in a smartphone like wireless charging and water resistance. It's even pushing a few boundaries with the 18:9 screen and super thin bezels, and is setting the bar for what looks to be the future of smartphones. LG is squarely back in the flagship conversation, and for good reason, and the G6 is shaping up to be a part of that conversation for the rest of 2017, and that's really exciting. As always, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed this review of the LG G6. If you did, please give the thumbs up down below, and also subscribe to the channel, which is also down below, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our future uploads. And check us out on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, Google+, all that good stuff will be linked down below. And also check out the website as well for more in-depth coverage, AndroidAuthority.com, because we are your source for all things Android.